So thank you for joining us on Finance Friday. I'm Dr. Al Freeman, Associate Director of LCMS School Ministry. Once again, Grant Maynor to lead us in Finance Friday.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for having me back again, Al. I know you were on the fence after last session, but I'm glad to be back.
Negotiate your contract. So that's one of our Finance Friday items too. Never be scared to renegotiate sometimes.
Always get the best deal you can. So today we are going to talk about monitoring your budget. And so with monitoring your budget, there's things like forecasting and tracking trends. And so we're going to cover all of that in the best we can today. So to start off, we're going to talk about forecasting your budgets and financial data. So in order to properly use your budget and to monitor your budget, you're going to need to do some form of forecasting your revenue and expenses. So there's various tools out there on the internet that you can use to project your revenue and expenses, but a simple way to do it is to take 1 month of your fiscal year and then multiply all of your revenue and expense lines by 12. And that will project out 12 months of revenue and expenses. Now with schools, as we're all familiar, tend to be top heavy in some areas for revenue when you're getting all of your tuition, and can be top heavy in expenses and other times. Typically summers aren't as revenue and expense driven because there's not as much going on at school. But that's just a basic way to project out future revenue and expenses, is just to take 1 month and multiply it by 12. And so the reason why we want to forecast this financial data is because you can then use the numbers you're seeing for future months to make decisions with your budget. And so when you can look and see, oh, in 3 months, we're going to be over our budget already for this specific area. And that can give you the information to say, okay, we need to cut back spending, or we need to cut back other things in that area, maybe use a different budget area for those expenses. And you can then determine if you're going to stay under budget, go over budget in the coming months. So that's why
I might add, Grant, I think a lot of times in schools we think about making cuts in areas. So you definitely have to figure out the cuts, but also change your thinking a little bit in the school world. How do we increase revenue? Or how is it a combination of the two? So you most definitely, in this tracking process, you see you're going to have a deficit somewhere. Think about, can I increase revenue? Do I have to cut expenses? Or is there a combination of the two that will bring the budget in line?
And so as that last point says, you need to compare these numbers against your budget. And one of the biggest reasons why we're going through all these Finance Friday sessions is because your budget is the lifeblood of your school. And so if you have a good, well-prepared budget, you can use it to make financial decisions all year long, and you can see how the financial health of your school and organization. And so using these projected numbers against a good, well-formulated budget will make it easier for you to make decisions, whether that's cuts or figuring out ways to make revenue and those kind of things. And so along with that, you need to monitor your budget quite frequently. And so recommended, you should schedule budget meetings at least once a month. Ideally, you can do it maybe twice a month, but at least once a month, you should be sitting down with other people who are in charge of maybe different departments, but get a good group of people together that are in charge of budgetary items and sit down and look at your budget and those forecasted numbers and say, okay, how are we doing this month? How did we do last month? How are we looking for next month? And then make those decisions. Also, what you can do is if you have a budget and financial reports from the previous year, you can compare how you're doing, not just from month to month, but you can compare how you're doing compared to last fiscal year. Are our revenues up? Are our expenses up? How are we doing? And that's part of monitoring trends. And so some of the trends to look for is, do we have a big spike in expenses as compared to last year or last month? Are revenues down significantly from last year to last month? Those are your two big areas. Are your expenses higher or your revenues lower? And Al, you can maybe speak to this. In your experience, are there other trends that really need to be tracked for schools that you think are important?
Yeah, track all trends, because I'd love to see if there was any spike in terms of revenue spike or spending spike. So basically what we did is we had every month there, and we had every line item on our budget, and we would kind of code it as a green that there was a spike somewhere, as a yellow that there's a concern, and a red if we had a deficit, obviously, somewhere. It's really good. You talk about scheduling the budget meeting. Obviously, as principal, head of school, whatever the title might be in your situation, you have a finance person that you're getting these numbers from. And often we go to the school board, and that's where the finance discussion happens. It's really good to have a finance committee. I think far too often we don't utilize committees or strong committees necessarily like we should. A finance committee is a great committee to have, and it doesn't have to be large. It could be just two people with a finance background, and a lot of times it's a good way to vet people who may not be ready to be on your school board, but would love to be involved somehow with the school, and they have a financial expertise. They might be an accountant. They could be running their own business or something else. And it's a great way to get them involved, and it's a great way to get some additional eyes on your budget.
And that's one of the most important things when it comes to looking at your budget, is consistently having eyes on it, to use this tool that you have in your bag to say, hey, how are we looking financially? How is our organizational health currently? And so the more often that you can have eyes on your budget that know what they're looking at and can then provide information to you as a head of school or principal, the better off you're going to be, because you'll be able to enact those changes that are necessary, whether it's cutting down expenses, looking for ways to increase revenue. You'll be able to act on that quicker if you're looking at it more often.
Yeah, and I'll also kind of throw out there, Grant, know who you are as a finance person, as a leader of the school. What are your weak areas in terms of the budget and finance? And that's why we're doing Finance Fridays, to help with that process. But also, as a leader, I was always a little bit more bold financially. I was a risk taker. So it's good to have sometimes somebody on there to give you, well, I've considered this, considered that in this budget process. Or if you are a little bit more conservative, sometimes it's good to have somebody on your finance committee that might push you the other way. Be a little bit more bold in your thinking as well. We need the best of all worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to keep in mind is if you're a school that shares a budget with your church, that's more people that are involved then on that side, and you've got more things to think about. So it's more important to make sure you're monitoring regularly, especially if you've got those church expenses and revenues included on your budget. And honestly, it depends on what accounting software you're using, or whether you're just using Excel, spreadsheets. But a lot of financial software out there can produce budget reports that will show you these trends, whether there's a percentage on the side of, so sometimes they'll have one column that's current fiscal year, then another column that's previous fiscal year, and then a percentage next to it that tells you how much our expenses have increased or decreased, how much our revenues have increased or decreased as a percentage based on the previous fiscal year. And that's a really great tool to use. You, as the head of school, and whether your finance committee or finance person wants to use those tools, it really lays out plainly how your organizational health looks. So in one glance, you can kind of see, oh, we're 30% up in expenses at this point of the year compared to last year. So that's really important.
Yeah, and I would say, you kind of use the phrase, if your finance person wants to use it, they should be using it.
They should be,
because we need to know where we are in the budget at all times. So there's got to be some type of software that's utilized where you should get that data, and it should be available anytime, immediately. We never want to be caught off guard with the budget. You talked about that a little bit before, Grant. We have a lot of people out there. I always think of a Dave Summermeyer, who used to do financial seminars and still kind of does for a lot of Lutheran schools. The no, basically no money, no ministry. So you got to keep that in mind too. We have to know the budget. Otherwise, financially, our ministries are not excelling in the way that they should be, and we're not utilizing what God has provided for us to the fullest.
Absolutely. And I'm a finance guy, so if I had my way, you'd be looking at the budget every single day to see how things are going. That's probably a little bit overkill, but financial reports and the budget is your best friend when it comes to making organizational decisions. And that's what we're trying to do here is we're trying to provide resources, information so that our schools across the country can thrive and grow and really drive that ministry.